The hum was the first thing to die. For 3 cycles, it had been the only constant in Elias Thorne's universe, the low, thrumming heartbeat of the HLV Namasan's cryocores keeping the memories of his world from fading into the cold. Now, there was only silence, a profound and terrifying stillness that felt less like peace and more like a held breath. He stood on the observation deck, a cavernous space meant for 100 scholars, now occupied by 1 ghost and the ghosts of 10 million more. Outside, the swirling dust of the Serpent's Veil nebula glowed in hues of poison green and bruised violet, a cosmic curtain that had failed to hide them. 3 ships, sleek and geometric as obsidian blades, had pierced the veil, their forms anathema to the chaos of the nebula. They were architect vessels, purifiers, their design as sterile and unforgiving as the doctrine they enforced across the galaxy. They didn't hail him. The architects never wasted energy on pleasantries. Their communication was an act of sterile pronouncement, a declaration of inevitable, logical outcome. The message simply appeared on his console, crisp, white text on a black field archivist Thorne. The Viridian archive is incomplete. Surrender the vessel for integration. Your compliance will be rewarded with the tranquility of the Concord. Elias felt a bitter laugh catch in his throat. Tranquility. That's what they called the hollowing out of a species. The systematic erasure of every sharp edge of culture, every vibrant color of emotion, until all that remained was a placid, gray obedience. He remembered Viridia before the Concord. He remembered the Festival of Echoes, where the city squares would fill with the music of 100 different worlds, a symphony of human history. He remembered the scent of his wife's paint, the chaos of her studio, canvases alive with defiant joy. He remembered his daughter's laughter, a sound so pure it felt like it could hold up the sky. The architects had arrived not with warships, but with diplomats and promises of stability. They brought the Concord, a philosophy of pure logic, offering to cure humanity of its most self-destructive trait, its chaotic, unpredictable heart. They didn't use bombs to conquer Viridia. They used whispers. They silenced the music, calling it dissonant. They shuttered the art galleries, calling the work indulgent. They replaced frantic, passionate debate with calm, moderated consensus, step by logical step. They bled the world of its soul, and most hadn't even realized they were dying until it was too late. Elias had been the colony's chief archivist. His duty was to preserve their story. While the world outside his Athenaeum grew quieter, he and his team worked feverishly, backing up every poem, every song, every handwritten letter, every historical record, every piece of their identity into the Minimazan's central memory core. They called the core the heart. When the final stage of the Concord began, the great pacification, there was no violence, just a low, pervasive psychic frequency that settled over the planet like a fog, dampening strong emotions, smoothing away individuality, leaving behind a population of compliant, serene shells. His wife, Anya, had fought it. She had barricaded herself in her studio, painting with a fury he had never seen, trying to capture the rage and grief on canvas before it was stolen from her. The last time he saw her, she was staring at her masterpiece, a vibrant storm of color, her eyes wide with confusion. "I don't feel it anymore." "Elias," she had whispered, a single tear tracing a path through the paint on her cheek. "I know it's supposed to mean something, but I don't feel it." That was the day he fled, smuggling his daughter, Lily, and the heart aboard the Mnemosyne, an old, decommissioned librarian-class vessel he and his loyalists had secretly restored. They didn't make it far. An Architect patrol caught them at the system's edge. In the confusion, his escape pod with Lily inside was separated, sent spiraling into an uncharted asteroid field. While he was forced to jump, the image of her small, terrified face in the viewport burned into his memory forever. He'd been running ever since, the sole guardian of a dead world soul, hunted by the murderers who wanted to complete their collection. A chime brought him back to the present. The ship's AI, an ancient, wizened personality matrix named Cato, spoke in a voice like rustling parchment. "They are deploying a suppression field, Elias. It will neutralize our primary systems within the hour. They do not intend to destroy us. They intend to board." Elias walked from the viewport to the center of the bridge, a circular platform surrounding a holographic projector. He placed his hand on the console, and the air shimmered. A single, glowing orb of light appeared, woven with threads of silver and gold data streams. The heart. He could feel the memories within it, the collective consciousness of his people. A silent, sleeping storm. For months, he had been only a keeper, a protector. But the architects had finally cornered him, and a keeper could not win this fight. He needed to be something else. He needed to be a weapon. "Cato," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "Take us to the engine room. Access restricted file, Prometheus unbound." The AI paused for a fraction of a second, the closest it could come to expressing surprise. "Elias, the resonance engine is a forbidden technology. The early Federation outlawed it for a reason. It is not a weapon. It is a catalyst for psychic annihilation. To activate it is to risk shattering your own mind." "They shattered my world first," Elias replied, the words tasting like ash. "They want our memory. They can have it. All of it. At once." The engine room of the Mnemosyne was a cathedral of forgotten science. In the center, shielded behind layers of leaded plasteel, was a device that looked nothing like an engine. It was a sphere of interlocking rings and crystalline conduits, designed not to propel a ship through space, but to propel thoughts and emotions through the fabric of reality itself. The resonance engine was built on a terrifyingly simple principle that memory and emotion were not just ephemeral electrochemical reactions, but possessed a tangible quantum energy, an energy that could be focused, amplified, and broadcast. It was designed to create a shared consciousness, a network of minds, but the first tests had been catastrophic. The raw, unfiltered emotions of the test subjects, amplified 1,000-fold, had driven entire colonies mad. It was decommissioned, buried in the core of an old librarian ship, and forgotten by all but a few archivists who guarded the knowledge as a warning. Elias stood before the containment chamber, his reflection a pale, gaunt figure in the polished metal. He was no soldier. He was a man of books and quiet contemplation. The calluses on his hands were from handling ancient data slates, not from gripping the stock of a pulse rifle, but as he looked at the purifier ships on the monitor, their cold, logical forms poised to violate the last sanctuary of his people, he felt an emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel since Anya's eyes had gone blank. Rage. A pure, clean, cold rage that burned away all fear. He bypassed the security locks, his fingers flying across the console with an archivist's precision. He was not destroying a file, he was unsealing one. With a deep groan, the containment chamber irised open, revealing the crystalline core of the engine. The air grew cold, and the low hum that had vanished from the ship returned. This time from the engine, a hungry, waiting sound. "I'm connecting the heart." "Cato," Elias announced, his voice strained. "Route all non-essential power to the engine. Prepare to broadcast on a wide, omnidirectional band." The feedback could be lethal, Cato warned. "The emotional cascade." "They think our emotions are a weakness," Elias interrupted, plugging a thick bundle of fiber optic cables from the holographic projector's base into the engine's primary input. "Let's show them what a weakness can do when it's weaponized." The heart pulsed, its light flowing down the cables and into the engine. The hum grew into a roar, not of sound, but of something deeper. A psychic vibration that made the fillings in Elias's teeth ache. The lights on the bridge flickered and died, plunging him into darkness, lit only by the incandescent fury of the engine's core. On his console, he saw the memories from the heart flashing across the screen. Too fast to comprehend, but not too fast to feel. The joy of a first kiss in the Viridian starlight. The grief of a mother bearing her son. The pride of an artist finishing her masterpiece. The terror of a world watching its own soul fade away. The laughter of his daughter. The despair in his wife's eyes. It was all there. 10 million lives. A symphony of humanity. Every note of love, hate, fear, and courage, all being drawn into the engine, compressed and amplified into a single, terrible chord on the lead purifier ship. Commander Xylos stood on its sterile, white bridge, observing the silent human vessel. The target was non-compliant, a logical flaw that would be corrected. Its systems were failing, as predicted. The boarding party was prepared to retrieve the archive and pacify the lone operator. It was a routine cleansing. Then, the feeling hit. It was not a sound, not a tremor, but a pressure from within. A sudden, inexplicable wave of something. Xylos, a being whose species had sublimated individual emotion for collective logic millennia ago, had no word for it. It was a phantom limb, a ghost in its consciousness. It felt like loss. A moment later, a wave of something else crashed over it. Elation. Pure, unreasoning joy that made its primary mandibles click in confusion. The bridge crew stirred, their movements becoming erratic. One of them began to keen, a high-pitched sound of sorrow their race hadn't produced in ages. Another slammed its fists against a console, overcome by a sudden, violent anger. Xylos clutched its head as a billion alien memories flooded its mind. The unfiltered human experience of Viridia. It saw a son it had never known, felt the warmth of a lover it had never held, mourned a child it had never born. The cold logic of the Concord, the foundation of its entire existence, shattered like glass. The universe was not a neat, orderly equation. It was a chaotic, beautiful, agonizing storm of feeling, and the revelation was too much to bear. The commander opened its mouth, and for the first time in its life, it screamed. Back on the Mimosan, Elias fell to his knees, his nose bleeding, the psychic backlash washing over him. He felt the echo of their minds breaking, the sound of pure logic dissolving in the face of a love story, a lullaby, a declaration of war. He watched the view screen as the 3 purifier ships went dark. Their lights didn't just turn off, they were extinguished, one by one, like candles in a hurricane. No explosion, no debris, just 3 new tombs drifting in the silent nebula, their crews driven catatonically insane or simply dead, their neural pathways burned out by an overload of pure, weaponized feeling. The resonance engine spun down, its hungry hum fading back into silence. The heart reappeared on its pedestal, dimmer now, but still glowing. Elias shakily got to his feet, leaning against the cold console. He had survived. He had won. But the archivist in him was dead. He had taken the beautiful, complex story of his people and turned it into a psychic scream that murdered his enemies in their own minds. He had desecrated his own temple to save it. There was no going back. The architects would not let this go unanswered. They would send more ships, entire fleets. He could not fight them alone. He needed a crew. He needed soldiers, killers, outcasts, people who still remembered how to hate, people the Concord hadn't yet broken. "Cato," he rasped, wiping the blood from his lip. "Set a course for the Tartarus Rift. Plot a route to the shadow port of Requiem." Cato's voice was soft. "That is a lawless sector, Elias, a haven for pirates, mercenaries, and fugitives." "Good," Elias said, his eyes fixed on the dead ships outside. "We'll be among friends." The Mnemosyne, the last library of a forgotten world, turned its nose away from the light and plunged deeper into the darkness. No longer a vessel of preservation, but a ghost ship preparing for war. The Tartarus Rift did not welcome visitors. It consumed them. It was a scar on the fabric of space-time, a region where the normal laws of physics went to die, twisting themselves into new and malevolent shapes. Stars did not shine here. They wept, their light smeared across the void by gravitational tides that would tear a lesser ship to ribbons. The Mnemosyne, old and weary as she was, had been built in an age when ships were designed to endure the unknown. Her hull forged from alloys the modern galaxy had forgotten how to make. She groaned and shuddered as Elias piloted her through the cosmic maelstrom, the ship's ancient bones protesting the abuse. For Elias, the journey was a fitting penance. The silence on his bridge was no longer empty. It was filled with the ghosts of the minds he had broken. He had replayed the final moments of the purifier ships 100 times, watching their lights extinguish in the nebula's glow. He felt no triumph, only a hollow, aching sense of transgression. The archivist in him, the man who believed in the sanctity of all stories, mourned the 3 shiploads of consciousness he had snuffed out. But the survivor, the father, the widower, knew he would do it again without hesitation. The rift was a frontier of outcasts, a place where entire systems had been cut off from the galactic core during the old expansion wars and had festered in isolation ever since. It was the galaxy's dark basement, filled with everything the pristine, logical worlds of the Concord wanted to forget. And at its heart was Requiem. It wasn't a planet or a station in the traditional sense, but a colossal, hollowed-out asteroid, the corpse of a dwarf planet shattered by some long-dead celestial cataclysm. It tumbled through the rift like a skull, its cratered surface crawling with a cancerous growth of docking arms, makeshift habitats, and landing pads bolted together over centuries of lawless occupation. As the Mnemosyne approached, Requiem revealed itself as a chaotic tapestry of flickering neon signs in a dozen languages, plumes of venting atmosphere, and the constant, frenetic ballet of smuggler ships and pirate cutters darting in and out of its gaping maws. Cato, ever the cautious counsel, filled the comms with warnings. I am detecting multiple unauthorized weapon emplacements, fluctuating energy signatures consistent with unstable reactors, and no centralized docking authority. Docking protocols recommend extreme prejudice. Elias ignored the AI's coded advice to turn back. He guided the Mnemosyne toward a less crowded docking pylon, the ship's stately, scholarly lines a stark contrast to the jagged, weaponized vessels surrounding it. He paid the exorbitant, untraceable docking fee with a sliver of the emergency funds he'd preserved, and the magnetic clamps engaged with a percussive thud that sealed his decision. The airlock hissed open onto a scene of pure, unadulterated chaos. The air in Requiem was a thick cocktail of ozone, recycled oxygen, sizzling alien meats from food stalls, and the metallic tang of unshielded machinery. The noise was a physical assault, a cacophony of shouting merchants, the high-pitched whine of repulsor lifts, the deep thrum of the asteroid's own failing life support, and a dozen different strains of music bleeding together into a dissonant anthem of desperation. Beings of every conceivable shape and size pushed through the crowded causeways hulking, four-armed mercenaries haggling with slender, insectoid information brokers, human prospectors with faces caked in asteroid dust gambling with reptilian enforcers. This was the raw, untamed life the architects sought to sterilize, and Elias felt a strange sense of homecoming. He was a ghost here, a man out of time and place, but for the first time since Viridia fell, he was not alone in his defiance. He sought a specific place, a name whispered in the data havens he'd accessed during his flight, a cantina called the Broken Helix. It was a place where contracts were made, and crews were forged in promises of wealth or vengeance. He found it tucked away in a sector of the asteroid known as the Boneyard, where the hulls of derelict ships formed the walls and ceilings of the city. The sign above the door was a flickering hologram of a fractured DNA strand, a fitting symbol for the genetic misfits and societal rejects within. Inside, the air was even thicker, heavy with smoke and spilled liquor. The patrons were a hard-bitten collection of the galaxy's forgotten children. Elias's simple archivist's tunic and the haunted, scholarly look in his eyes drew more than a few suspicious glances. He was a sheep walking into a den of wolves. He scanned the room, his mind cross-referencing the faces with the sparse, unreliable intelligence he had gathered. He was looking for two people. He found the first at a corner table, hunched over a game of chance that involved interlocking, razor-sharp blades, and a steady hand. She was human, or close to it, with short-cropped, silver hair, cybernetic eyes that glowed with a faint, predatory light, and a pilot's jacket so worn it looked like a second skin. Her name was Kaylin Rost, known in the Rift simply as K, a former fleet prodigy from a system that had voluntarily joined the Conquered. She had deserted after her entire squadron was decommissioned for showing signs of excessive individualism. Now, she was the best freelance pilot in the sector, a ghost who could make a ship dance through a minefield and disappear into an ion storm. As Elias watched, her opponent, a brutish Corvian with 4 eyes, made a clumsy move. Kay's hands blurred. The blades clicked into a new, impossible configuration, and the Corvians fell apart. He roared in frustration, slamming a meaty fist on the table. Kay simply smirked, sweeping her winnings into a pouch with practiced ease, her glowing eyes never leaving the enraged alien. She was fast, precise, and utterly unafraid. He found his second target not by sight, but by presence. The bar's enforcer was a Xylot, a species of hulking, arboreal beings from a world the architects had paved over to build a logic refinery. This one, Yorick, was a mountain of knotted muscle and thick, bark-like skin, his head completely bald and covered in faint, swirling patterns that seemed to shift in the dim light. The Xylots were rumored to have a deep, psionic connection to their planet's flora, a bond the architects had severed, leaving the survivors adrift and broken. Yorick stood by the bar, his arms crossed, his gaze sweeping the room with a quiet, weary intelligence that belied his formidable size. He didn't just watch, he observed, cataloging threats with the placid efficiency of a force of nature. He was the anchor Elias needed, the raw strength and resilience his mission demanded. Elias took a breath, the recycled air feeling thin in his lungs, and walked toward Kay's table. "Kalen Rost," he said, his voice softer than he intended. Kay's cybernetic eyes snapped to him, their internal lenses whirring as they scanned him from head to toe. "Never seen you before. Bookworm," she said, her voice a low, gravelly hum. "You're either brave or stupid. Which is it?" "I'm looking for a pilot," Elias stated, ignoring the insult. She let out a short, humorless laugh. "I'm not for hire, especially not for milk runs on a floating museum." "This isn't a milk run," Elias said, his gaze steady. "It's a war." That got her attention. She leaned forward, her smirk fading. "War's bad for business. Who's the target?" "The architects." The name fell into the space between them like a block of ice. The casual noise of the bar seemed to recede. Kay's face hardened, the easy cynicism replaced by a flicker of something ancient and cold. Before she could answer, a heavy shadow fell over their table. Jorik the Xylot stood over them, his massive frame blocking out the light. "The old man is bothering you, Kay," he rumbled, his voice like grinding stones. Kay waved a dismissive hand. "He's just leaving." "No," Elias said, looking up at the giant. "I'm not." He stood, his heart hammering against his ribs, but his voice remained even. "My name is Elias Thorne. I am the last archivist of Viridia. The architects burned my world and stole my daughter. They have done the same to all of you. In one way or another, they have taken your homes, your families, your histories. They leave behind nothing but quiet, obedient husks." A few nearby patrons grumbled, turning away, but others listened. Their eyes narrowed. "They offer tranquility," Elias continued, his voice rising, imbued with a passion he hadn't felt in years. "But it is the tranquility of the grave. They believe our emotions, our memories, our very identities are a flaw to be corrected. I am here to prove them wrong. I have a weapon they cannot comprehend, a weapon they cannot counter. I have the soul of a dead world, and I know how to make it scream." A scarred human mercenary at a nearby table laughed. "And what are you going to do?" Old man read them to death. The bar erupted in jeers. Elias felt a flush of despair. He was an archivist, not an orator. His words were failing. He closed his eyes and keyed the comm link hidden in his sleeve. A direct line to his ship. "Cato," he whispered, A silent command sent on a tight beam. File Lily's lullaby. Amplitude 10%. Broadcast radius 50 meters. Now. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a wave of pure, unadulterated emotion washed through the broken helix. It wasn't loud or violent like the psychic scream he'd unleashed on the purifiers. It was quiet, gentle, and utterly devastating. It was the feeling of a father's love for his daughter, a simple, heartfelt melody sung to a child in the dark. It was the memory of a small hand gripping his finger, the scent of her hair, the sound of her sleeping breath. It was a memory of home, of safety, of a love so profound it was a physical ache. The jeering laughter died in the mercenary's throat. He stared into his drink, his face crumbling as he was suddenly overwhelmed by the memory of a brother he'd lost in the Outer Rim Wars. The Corvian who had lost Decay let out a choked sob, his 4 eyes blinking rapidly as he remembered the hatching grounds of his homeworld, a place he could never return to. Every soul in that bar, no matter how hardened, was struck by the same feeling of profound, beautiful, and heartbreaking loss. They weren't just hearing a memory, they were feeling it as if it were their own. The wave receded as quickly as it came, leaving behind a stunned, echoing silence. The only sound was the low hum of the bar's ventilation. Yorick stared down at Elias, his stoic mask shattered. A single thick tear, like a bead of amber sap, traced a path down his bark-like cheek. He remembered the feeling of the sun through the leaves of his world's greatwood, a memory he thought had been burned out of him forever. Kay was on her feet, her cybernetic eyes wide, all traces of cynicism gone. She looked at Elias not as a fool, but as something far more dangerous. "What was that?" she breathed, her voice shaking. "That," Elias said, his own voice thick with unshed tears, "was page 1. The architects have built an empire of logic on the ashes of a million worlds like ours. I am going to remind them that a story, a real story, is the most powerful thing in the universe, and I am going to make sure ours has a better ending." He looked from Kay's shocked face to Yorick's awestruck gaze. "I can't offer you money or safety. I can only offer you a chance to make them feel what we have felt. I need a pilot who can fly through hell. I need an engineer who can keep a ghost ship from falling apart. I need a crew." Kay slowly sat back down, her glowing eyes fixed on him. A slow, dangerous smile spread across her face, but this time it held no humor, only a terrible resolve. "Where's your ship? Bookworm?" she asked. Yorick turned his massive head and looked at the bar owner. "I quit," he rumbled. Then he looked back at Elias. "The Nemazini will need her shields reinforced if we are to wage this war. I will see to it." In the silence of the bar, surrounded by the broken and the damned, Elias Thorne, the last archivist, had found the first members of his new army. The library was about to go to war. The Mimazini, once a quiet sanctuary of knowledge, transformed into a crucible of war. The sterile, silent corridors, designed for the soft footsteps of scholars, now echoed with the clang of tools, the hiss of welding torches, and the sharp, clipped commands of Kalen Rost. She moved through the ship like a storm front, her energy infectious and terrifying. Within a day, she had ripped out entire sections of the bridge's archaic control systems, replacing them with a custom-built pilot's throne of her own design, a chaotic web of manual toggles, haptic feedback grips, and half a dozen salvaged monitors that flickered with raw telemetry. She claimed the ship spoke to her in a language of vibrations and stress tolerances, a language Elias, with his purely academic understanding of the vessel, had never learned to hear. "She's got good bones," Kay had declared after her first deep diagnostic, her cybernetic eyes glowing as she interfaced directly with the ship's core systems. "But her reflexes are slow. She was built to think, not to bite. We need to teach her how to bite." Yorick, in contrast, brought a quiet, methodical reverence to his work. The engine room became his sanctum. He treated the ancient machinery not as a collection of parts, but as a living, breathing entity. He spent days tracing the ship's power conduits, his massive, bark-skinned hands surprisingly gentle as he reinforced weakened junctions and rerouted energy flows. He understood the Nemazan's weariness, the centuries of silent service that had thinned her veins and tired her heart. His greatest focus, however, was on the resonance engine. He encircled the device with a new layer of psionically attuned shielding, woven from a rare crystalline metal he'd bartered for in Requiem's blackest market. "The scream you unleashed was unrefined," he explained to Elias, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate in the deck plates. "It was the raw, chaotic grief of your world, a powerful weapon, but a dangerous one, like a fire without a hearth. It can burn the one who wields it. This shielding will help you focus the emotion, give it shape. We must turn the scream into a spear." Elias, meanwhile, became a different kind of captain. He was no commander, no tactician. He was the keeper of the flame, the source of their impossible new weapon. He spent his days immersed in the heart, the glowing orb of his people's collective consciousness. It was no longer just an archive to be protected. It was an arsenal to be cataloged. He navigated the data streams, not as an archivist preserving history, but as a weapons master selecting his blades. He isolated specific, potent emotional signatures, the defiant courage of the Viridian Guard during the last stand at the Capitol, the crushing despair of the artists as their works were declared illogical and burned, the fierce, protective love of a mother for her child. Each memory was a specific frequency, a unique psychic munition he could load into the resonance engine. The process was agonizing. To touch these memories was to relive them, and he would often emerge from his sessions pale and shaking, the phantom pains of a world's death clinging to him like a shroud. During one such session, he stumbled upon a protected file deep within the heart, one he himself had encrypted years ago and had forced himself to forget. Its title was simple: Lily's Room. Hesitantly, he opened it. It was not a memory, but a full sensory recording of his daughter's nursery from the day before they fled Viridia. He was there again, surrounded by the scent of clean linens and the soft glow of the holographic star chart on the ceiling. He saw the brightly colored stuffed animals piled in the corner, heard the gentle chime of a mobile turning in a phantom breeze. He felt the weight of his daughter, warm and sleeping, in his arms. The memory was so pure, so full of untainted love and peace, that it felt like a physical blow. It was the memory of everything he had lost, everything he was fighting for, and as he held it, he understood what Yorick meant. This memory was not a weapon of rage or grief. It was something else entirely. It was a shield. Their first mission was not an attack, but a heist. Kay's network of underworld contacts had unearthed a critical piece of intelligence. The architects were transporting a high-value asset from a newly pacified system. The asset was a Signian weaver, one of a race of telepathic artisans who could manipulate quantum foam, weaving it into impossibly complex data storage matrices. The architects used them to build the central archives for their conquered worlds, prisons for memories. According to Kay's source, this weaver was being transported to a mobile re-education facility, a prison ship called the Quietude, where its illogical artistic impulses would be surgically purged. The weaver is the key, Kay explained, pointing to a schematic on the holographic table. They can build the perfect archive, but they can also unmake one. If we can get them on our side, they could help us create a psychic virus, something we could upload into the Conquered's entire network. We could give every pacified world its memory back, all at once. The plan was insane. The Quietude was a state-of-the-art purifier vessel, escorted by 2 heavily armed Justicar-class frigates. It was a wolf pack, and the Mnemosyne was, on paper, little more than a well-fed sheep. "They won't be expecting us," Elias said, his voice quiet but firm. "They believe us to be a fluke, a single, anomalous event. Their logic dictates that we would run and hide. They will not anticipate a direct assault." Jorik nodded his massive head. "Logic is their weakness. They cannot account for desperation." The ambush was set in the Charybdis anomaly, a treacherous asteroid field where sensor ghosts and gravitational eddies made direct confrontation a nightmare. It was Kay's playground. She took the Mnemosyne into the field's densest cluster, her hands flying across her custom console as she danced the ancient vessel between tumbling mountains of rock and ice. She flew with the ship's internal dampeners off, forcing the crew to feel every lurch and spin, making the ship an extension of her own will. The architect Wolfpack entered the anomaly with cold, predictable precision, their flight paths optimized for efficiency, not survival. They saw the Mnemosyne on their scopes, a lone, erratic signal, and moved to intercept, their frigates peeling off to flank their target. It was exactly what Kay had been counting on. "They're taking the bait," she hissed, a predator's grin on her face. "Jorik, get ready to give them a push." As the first frigate closed in, its weapon ports glowing, Jorik diverted a massive surge of power to the ship's portside maneuvering thrusters. On Kay's command, he fired. The Mnemosyne, a ship not built for agility, performed an impossible lateral lurch, sliding out of the frigate's firing arc just as a volley of plasma bolts seared the space where they had been. The frigate, unable to correct its course in time amidst the dense asteroids, plowed headlong into a massive, iron-rich rock. The explosion was a silent, brilliant flash of light. "One down," Kay grunted, her knuckles white on the controls. The second frigate, its logical tactical matrix thrown into chaos by the Mnemosyne's illogical maneuver, hesitated for a fatal second. That was all Elias needed. "Now, Elias Zaire," Kay screamed. Elias stood before the resonance engine, his hands pressed against the psionically attuned shielding. He closed his eyes, not reaching for a memory of rage, but for one of pure, unadulterated terror. He chose the collective memory of Viridia's final moments, the helpless fear of watching loved ones become strangers, the panic of a world losing its mind. He funneled it into the engine, and Jorik's shielding shaped it into a psychic spear aimed directly at the remaining frigate. The effect was instantaneous. On the bridge of the Justicar frigate, the Architect crew was suddenly consumed by a primal, illogical fear. Their disciplined, orderly minds were flooded with a terror they had no context for, a species-wide panic attack that overloaded their neural functions. The ship's systems went haywire as its crew began to fight each other, their movements driven by a sudden, inexplicable paranoia. The frigate began firing wildly, its own plasma bolts tearing into its hull until its reactor went critical. Another silent flash lit up the asteroid field. 2 escorts, gone in less than a minute, without the Mnemosyne firing a single traditional weapon. Now, only the Quietude remained. The prison ship, larger and less maneuverable, tried to turn, its engines flaring, but Kay was already on top of it, bringing the Mnemosyne in so close their hulls nearly scraped. "Yorick, give me docking clamps," she yelled. "Elias, keep their heads down." Elias knew what he had to do. He couldn't risk harming the Weaver with another psychic assault. He needed a distraction, not an execution. He reached for a different kind of memory, not an emotion, but a cacophony of sensation. He broadcast the memory of the Viridian Festival of Echoes, a billion conflicting sounds, sights, and smells. A chaotic symphony of a culture at its vibrant, messy peak. The bridge of the Quietude was overwhelmed. The architects, used to a universe of sterile silence and order, were assaulted by the psychic noise of 1,000 different songs, the taste of 100 different foods, the feeling of 1,000,000 people celebrating life in its most gloriously illogical forms. Their sensors flickered with phantom images, their comms filled with ghost chatter. They were effectively deaf, blind, and utterly confused. Magnetic clamps slammed into the Quietude's hull with a bone-jarring shudder. Elias, Jorix, and Kay, now clad in dark, functional combat suits, stood at the airlock, pulse rifles at the ready. This was the part of the plan Elias dreaded most. The archivist had become a soldier. "The Weaver is being held in the central pacification chamber," Kay said, checking the charge on her rifle. "According to the schematics, it's on the lowest deck. We'll have to fight our way through." The airlock door hissed open, revealing a pristine, white corridor, eerily silent. "Let's make a withdrawal from the memory bank," Elias said, his voice grim. And with that, the 3 of them stepped onto the enemy vessel. A pilot who had forgotten how to follow orders, a gentle giant who had remembered how to fight, and an archivist who had learned to weaponize a broken heart. They were no longer running. They were raiding the tombs of the Empire that had tried to bury them. The interior of the Quietude was a monument to sterility. Every surface was a seamless, antiseptic white. The air was scrubbed of all scent, and the only sound was the faint, subliminal hum of the ship's pacification field. It was a sensory deprivation chamber the size of a city block, designed to break the will of its prisoners by starving their minds of stimulus. To the crew of the Mnemosyne, stepping into it from the vibrant chaos of their own vessel was like being plunged into a void. It was an environment designed to extinguish the very emotional sparks they now wielded as weapons. The architect guards were not soldiers in the traditional sense. They were tall, slender beings encased in white, form-fitting armor, their movements economical and precise. They carried no visible weapons. Their method of subjugation was a handheld resonance rod that could amplify the ship's pacification field, instantly quelling aggressive thoughts and inducing a state of placid compliance. They moved in silent, logical formations, appearing at corridor intersections with unnerving predictability. The first encounter was a test of Elias's new brutal calculus. As two guards rounded a corner, their heads turning in unison towards the intruders, Kay and Yorick raised their rifles, but Elias held up a hand. "Wait," he commanded, closing his eyes. He didn't need a psychic scream or a wave of sensory overload. He needed something more precise. He reached into the heart and pulled out a single, sharp sliver of emotion, pure, focused frustration. It was the memory of a Viridian scientist, a brilliant mathematician, on the verge of a breakthrough, repeatedly failing to solve a complex equation. It was the maddening feeling of a solution being just out of reach, of a logical process failing again and again. He focused it, Yorick's shielding acting like a lens, and projected it directly at the two guards. The effect was subtle, but immediate. The guards stopped, their precise formation faltering. One of them tilted its head, a gesture of deep confusion. Their logical mind, which operated on principles of flawless execution, were suddenly infected with a virus of fallibility. They couldn't compute the illogical feeling of being wrong. As they stood frozen in their cognitive loop, Yorick moved. He wasn't a soldier who killed, but a force that removed obstacles. He swept forward, his massive arms moving in a powerful, non-lethal arc, and slammed the two guards against the corridor wall. They crumpled to the deck, their systems rebooting from the logical error, but they were out of the fight. "Clever bookworm," Kay muttered, lowering her rifle with a grudging respect. "You outthought the thinking machines." They moved deeper into the ship, a ghost crew in a silent tomb. Elias became their key, using targeted emotional pulses to bypass security systems, distract patrols, and disorient the ship's automated defenses. He used the memory of a Viridian child stage fright to make surveillance cameras jitter and lose focus. He broadcast the intense, territorial rage of a nesting predator to make the ship's internal security drones misidentify each other as threats, causing them to attack one another in a flurry of sparks and screeching metal. He was turning the architect's own sterile environment against them, polluting their logic with the beautiful, messy static of life. The pacification chamber was on the lowest deck, a vast, spherical room that felt like the inside of a skull. In the center, suspended in a shimmering energy field, was the Signian Weaver. It was a being of pure light and sound, its form a constantly shifting fractal of crystalline energy, emitting a low, mournful hum. Wires and conduits, like metallic leeches, were attached to the energy field, siphoning its creative essence, forcing it to construct the data matrices for the Concord's archives. Around the chamber stood a dozen elite architect prelates, their white armor adorned with the black sigil of the Concord's highest order. They were the surgeons, the ones tasked with purging the Weaver's identity. As the trio entered, the head prelate turned, its faceless helmet betraying no emotion. "The Viridian anomaly," it stated, its voice a synthesized, toneless hum broadcast directly into their minds. "Your resistance is illogical. The Weaver's art is a symptom of chaos. We are providing it with the gift of purpose." "You call enslavement a gift," Elias shot back, his voice raw. The prelate made a gesture, and the resonance rods of the other guards powered up, the air growing thick with psychic pressure. "Purpose is the logical conclusion of existence," the prelate droned. "Individuality is a variable that leads to error. It must be corrected." Kay and Yorick took up defensive positions, but they were hopelessly outnumbered and outmatched. The prelate's amplified pacification field was a blunt instrument of immense power, and Elias could feel it pressing in on his mind, trying to smooth away his anger, his grief, his very will to fight. He felt the memory of Lily starting to fade, the sharp edges of his rage beginning to dull. This was how they won, not with a bang, but with a whisper that silenced all others. He had one last weapon, one he had been afraid to use. It was not a memory of rage or terror. It was the memory he had found in his daughter's room. It was the memory of pure, unconditional love. He knew that broadcasting it would leave him completely exposed, his own mind a wide-open gateway for the prelate's attack. But it was the only thing they would never expect. "K. Jorich, get to the Weaver," he yelled, his voice strained. Now he shut his eyes, ignoring the psychic onslaught, and opened the floodgates. He didn't project the memory as a weapon. He simply released it. The memory of Lily's lullaby, the pure, untainted love of a father for his child, flooded the chamber. But this time, it wasn't a gentle wave. It was a supernova. The prelates, whose minds were a fortress of cold, hard logic, had no defense against such an illogical, overwhelming force. Love was not a variable in their equations. It did not compute. It was an impossible, paradoxical concept, and its sudden, absolute presence in their consciousness was like a master equation resolving to zero. They didn't scream. They didn't fall. They simply stopped. Their resonance rods clattered to the floor as their minds, unable to reconcile the existence of an emotion so powerful and so completely outside their understanding, simply shut down. The head prelate stood for a moment longer, its helmet turned towards Elias. A single, synthesized word echoed in his mind. Not a statement of logic, but a question. Why? Then, it too went still. A white statue in a silent room. Elias collapsed to his knees, the psychic effort leaving him drained and trembling. The pacification field dissipated, and the air in the chamber felt breathable again. Kay and Joris, who had been struggling against the psychic pressure, rushed forward. Kay ran to the control console, her fingers flying as she worked to disable the Weaver's energy cage, while Jorik stood guard over Elias's shuddering form. The energy field flickered and died. The Signian Weaver, free for the first time in cycles, floated down to the floor. Its light pulsed, and a voice, not of words, but of pure, melodic thought, filled their minds. "You bleed memory. Archivist of Viridia, you carry a great and terrible song. We came to set you free," Elias managed, looking up at the creature of light. "Freedom is not a location. It is a choice," the Weaver communicated. "The Concord does not destroy memory. They cage it. I have been forced to build the cages. I know their design. I know their flaws." "Can you help us?" Kay asked, stepping back from the console, her rifle still held at the ready. "Can you help us tear them down?" The Weaver's light seemed to brighten, its form shifting from a mournful blue to a defiant, golden hue. "They sought to use my art to create order. I will use my art to orchestrate a masterpiece of chaos. I will be your instrument, archivist, and together we will compose a symphony that will wake the dead and shatter this empire of silence." As Yorick helped Elias to his feet, the Weaver floated towards them, its light warm and comforting. A new member had joined the crew of the Mnemosyne. They had their key, their ghost in the machine. Back on their ship, as Kay expertly piloted them away from the drifting, silent prison. A new energy filled the bridge. It was no longer just the grim determination of survivors. It was the fierce, dangerous spark of hope. They had stolen a piece of the architect's soul, and now they were going to use it to give the galaxy its own soul back. The war for memory had truly begun. The Mnemosyne became a composer's studio, floating in the silent darkness between systems. The Weaver, now the soul of the ship's bridge, did not use instruments of wood or wire. It wove its symphony from the raw data of the heart, using the memories of Viridia as its notes. It took the soaring joy of a wedding day and braided it with the quiet grief of a funeral dirge. It harmonized the focused passion of a scientist's discovery with the chaotic, defiant rage of a protest march. It was a composition of contradictions, a testament to the messy, illogical, and beautiful nature of a free consciousness. Elias was the conductor, standing before the resonance engine, while the Weaver's melodic thoughts guided him through the archive of his own people. He learned to hold a memory of heartbreak without being consumed by it, to touch a moment of pure happiness without being blinded by its light. He was no longer just a keeper or a weapon. He was a conduit, preparing to channel the full emotional spectrum of his civilization into one galaxy-altering broadcast. Yorick worked ceaselessly in the engine room, transforming the heart of the ship into a resonant chamber. He knew the final broadcast would require a level of power the Mnemosyne was never designed to produce. He bypassed safety protocols, jury-rigged power couplings, and cooled the engine's core with a jury-rigged system that vented supercooled helium directly into the void, creating a shimmering, temporary nebula in their wake. When you give the command, Elias, he had rumbled, his hand resting on the engine's housing as if calming a living beast. You will have everything she is capable of giving, but it will be the last song she ever sings. Kay, in her pilot's throne, was the tip of the spear. She drilled them relentlessly, pushing the old ship through impossible simulations, memorizing the schematics of their final target, the Nexus of Concord. It was not a station or a planet, but a crystalline Dyson sphere built around a neutron star, a place where the architects stored the caged memories of 1,000 pacified species and broadcast the Concord's pacification signal across the galaxy. It was the most heavily defended location in known space, the silent, beating heart of their gray empire. Their plan was audacious to the point of suicide. Kay would pilot them through the outer defenses on a high-velocity burn. Jorik would provide the power for a single, overwhelming broadcast. The Weaver would shape the psychic payload, and Elias would unleash the symphony. One shot to wake a galaxy. As they translated from void space into the Nexus system, the sheer scale of the architect's power was laid bare. A fleet of hundreds of Purifier and Justicar vessels hung in perfect, geometric orbits around the crystalline sphere. Their logic was cold and absolute. They had anticipated this. "They're not hailing us," Kay observed, her cybernetic eyes scanning the tactical display, her voice tight. "They're not moving to intercept. They're just waiting." A new feeling began to press in on the ship. A creeping numbness that had nothing to do with the cold of space. Elias felt it first, a dulling of the sharp edges of his grief, a quietening of the rage that had fueled him. "It's a null field," he whispered, a dreadful understanding dawning on him. A zone of psychic silence. They learned from the quietude. They've created a weapon that counters ours. The weaver's melodic thought confirmed his fear. It is a void of emotion, a wall of pure, absolute logic. My song cannot pass through it. We are deafened. On Kay's display, the full extent of the trap was revealed. A vast perimeter around the Nexus was saturated with the null field. To get close enough for the broadcast, they would have to fly through a dead zone where their greatest weapon was useless. They would be a simple, physical target for the entire Architect fleet. "So we do it the old-fashioned way," Kay said, a grim smile touching her lips. "No tricks, no ghost in the machine, just pure, unfiltered speed and a whole lot of nerve." She looked back at Elias. "Can you survive it? Bookworm, flying through that field will feel like having your soul scooped out with a spoon." Elias thought of Lily, of Anya, of the faces in the heart. "They already tried that once," he replied, his voice steady. "It didn't stick." The Mimosini charged. Kay pushed the engines to their breaking point, and the ancient ship screamed in protest as it accelerated towards the Architect fleet. The first volleys of plasma fire stitched the darkness around them, their trajectories calculated with flawless precision. But Kay's flying was an art form of glorious, unpredictable chaos. She spun the ship on its axis, using the gravitational pull of a nearby moonlet to slingshot them under the main line of fire. She treated the Mnemosyne less like a vessel and more like a blade, cutting a path where none should exist. Jorik, in the engine room, became a master of improvisation, rerouting power from failing systems to the shields, keeping the ship alive on borrowed time and sheer force of will. The moment they hit the null field, the universe changed. The vibrant presence of the heart on the bridge vanished. The Weaver's light dimmed to a faint, pained flicker. For Elias, it was like going instantly deaf, blind, and numb. The memories, the emotions, the very essence of his people that had become a part of him were gone, walled off behind a barrier of absolute nothing. He was just a man again, small and terrified, and the silence was a crushing weight. The ship shuddered violently as a plasma bolt struck their aft shields, Yorick managing to absorb most of the blow, but not all of it. The lights on the bridge flickered and died, plunging them into a terrifying, silent darkness lit only by the red glow of emergency alerts. They were through the outer fleet, but they were flying blind and broken into the heart of the enemy's power. Shields at 12%. Yorick's voice boomed over the comm, strained with effort. "Hull integrity failing. She's breaking apart. Just a little further." Kay grunted, her hands a blur on the controls, sweat beading on her brow. Through the main viewport, the Nexus of Concord loomed, a breathtaking, terrifying sphere of crystalline perfection. They were inside the null field, and they were at its very center. The psychic silence here was absolute, but they were also past the fleet. There was a moment of pure, terrifying silence, the eye of the storm. "It's now or never." "Elias," Kay breathed. "In the darkness." Elias reached out and placed his hands on the cold, dormant pedestal where the heart had been. The null field was a wall, but it was a wall of logic, and he had a key that logic could not comprehend. He didn't try to broadcast rage or fear. He didn't even try to broadcast the full symphony. He reached for one single, perfect, impossible memory: Lily's room. He held on to the feeling of his daughter's sleeping warmth, the scent of her room, the pure, unconditional love that had defined his existence. It was an emotion that had no opposite, no logical counterargument. It was an axiom of the soul. He pushed that feeling, not as a weapon, but as a seed, into the silent, waiting core of the resonance engine. Now, the Weaver's thought pulsed, a single, defiant spark in the immense darkness. York slammed his hand down on the final conduit, shunting every last erg of power from the Mnemosyne's dying heart into the engine. The engine didn't scream. It sang. The single note of Elias's love, shaped by the Weaver and amplified by the engine, erupted outwards. It did not shatter the null field. It passed through it, because love is not a frequency to be jammed, but a truth to be felt. The note struck the nexus, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then, a single crack appeared in the crystalline sphere, not of physical damage, but of light. The Symphony of Awakening had found its first instrument. The memory of Lily's lullaby became the carrier wave, and on it, the Weaver broadcast the entirety of the heart. 1 billion caged memories, 1,000 silenced cultures were unleashed on a world of gray plains. A pacified insectoid being stopped its monotonous work, looked up at its twin suns, and remembered the taste of honey sap from the vibrant flowers that had once covered its world. In a silent city of glass towers, a humanoid whose species had communicated through song for millennia opened its mouth and let out a single, hesitant, beautiful note. Across the galaxy, the quiet, obedient husks of the Concord began to stir. They remembered their art, their gods, their children, their rage. They remembered who they were. The nexus of Concord did not explode. Its light simply went out, its purpose undone. The pacification signal that had held a galaxy in chains for centuries fell silent. On the bridge of the Mnemosyne, the heart bloomed back into existence, brighter than ever. The ship was a wreck, drifting and broken, but it was alive. Elias fell back into his chair, the psychic backlash leaving him not broken, but hollowed out, empty, and for the first time in a long time, at peace. He had given his most precious memory away, not as a sacrifice, but as a gift to the entire galaxy. He had not gotten his daughter back, but he had ensured that no one would ever forget her. The Architect fleet, its central command severed, its crews suddenly feeling the first confusing flickers of individuality, fell into chaos. They did not attack the broken Mnemosyne. They simply drifted, lost. In the quiet aftermath, Kay leaned back in her throne, a slow, weary smile on her face. Jorik's deep. Rumbling laughter echoed softly from the engine room. The Weaver's light filled the bridge with a gentle, warm glow. They had done it. They had flown a library into the heart of an empire and reminded it that the most powerful force in the universe is not logic, nor is it rage. It is a story of a life lived, of a love lost, and of the defiant, unbreakable promise to never, ever be silenced. The galaxy was awake now, loud, chaotic, and beautifully, terrifyingly free. And the Mnemosyne, the last library of Viridia, floated silently in the dawn of a new age, its mission complete, its own story finally told,